Hello, I'm Steve with Hunting Tactical. In this video I'm going to cover the installation of the HT60 stock on the Marlin Model 60 and 795. To begin with, I'd like to go over the features of the stock with you. Starting out with the Forearm, you have an industry standard Picatinny rail Forearm with it's a tri-Picatinny rail, and this adjusts back and forth so that regardless of your arm length, you can still get good reach to your accessories, and it helps balance the stock out as well. You also have an adjustable pistol grip. This pistol grip, the rake angle adjusts, as well as the distance to the trigger, so regardless of hand size, you can still get a comfortable sweet spot on the trigger finger. One of the most beneficial features of the HT60 stock is the adjustable pivoting buttstock. Okay, you have a set pin here, you remove the set pin, you get 3 points, and that allows you, so that regardless of your body size and sighting system you have, it allows you to get a good sight picture with your weapon. Also using the industry standard telescoping stock, 6 points of adjustment, goes 1 5/8 longer to 1 5/8 shorter than the factory stock. It also, because it's the industry standard thread size, you can use the single point sling adapters on there, as well as we sell the option to include a folding stock adapter from UTG. Because the gun is over 26 inches with the HT60 stock, you can operate the gun with it folded. Included in the HT60 kit is the tri-Picatinny rail forearm, the receiver, the swivel, telescoping tube, buttstock, locking lever, the locking pin with a spring, nut, and roll pin, a total of 7 hex head nuts, 4 for the swivel components, total of 3 long screws, 2 for the swivel component, castle nut, locking ring, both a left and right pistol grip mount, the adjustable pistol grip, 5/16 Allen wrench, the magazine port plug for the Model 60, the trigger guard spacer for the Model 795, 2 short screws that go onto the adjustable Picatinny forearm, and 3 more of the 7 total hex head nuts. To start with, we're going to remove the Model 60 from the factory stock. Always make sure to do your safety check, locking the bolt to the rear, making sure it's unloaded, and making sure that the safety is on. To remove the Model 60 from the factory stock, you'll remove the front takedown screw, setting it aside so that you can use it later. It will be reused. Then remove the rear takedown screw, again setting it aside. It will be reused in the assembly of the HT60. Grasping the stock in one hand and the rifle in the other, slide that apart and set the rifle aside. The next step will be to remove the trigger assembly. You'll need to hold the thumb screw down inside with one finger, and using a flathead screwdriver you're going to remove the screw in front of the trigger assembly. Remove the thumb nut, again set it aside, it's going to be reused along with the trigger assembly. Now you can throw away the traditional style stock that came with it from the factory. The first step in assembly of the HT60 stock is assembling the buttstock. To do this, using the buttstock, the locking lever, the locking pin with the spring, nut, and roll pin. I'm going to remove the nut from the end of the locking pin, leaving the spring on. The wider end of the pin will face up. Insert the locking pin in the hole in the top of the buttstock. Inserting the pin in the top of the buttstock and into the channel below. It can be helpful to use a pair of needle nose pliers to guide it down in. Pressing down on the pin so that it sticks out the bottom, you'll put on the locking lever. Then thread on the thumb nut all the way on so that the locking pin is flush with the end of the nut, and line up the hole in the nut with the hole in the pin. Do not insert the roll pin at this time. We're going to make some adjustments to this later and insert that then. Assembling the telescoping tube into the swivel, we will also need the locking ring and the castle nut. If you're going to put on any accessories, such as a single point sling adapter or the UTG folding stock adapter, you'll need those at this time as well. You'll start by threading the castle nut onto the telescoping tube. You'll notice that there are notches in one end of the castle nut. Those will go towards the rear end of the telescoping tube. We're going to thread this on all the way. It should thread on nice and easy. Make sure not to cross thread this. You want it threaded on all the way to the end. If you've got any adapters, you're going to put those on now. Next, with the locking ring, you'll notice that there is a notch on the inside as well as a notch that is sticking out the side. That notch goes towards the front of the buffer tube with the threads. The notch on the inside goes in the notch in the threads on the telescoping tube. And you'll pull that locking ring all the way down till it reaches the castle nut. Then we're going to thread it into the swivel. Now, a tip that you can do is not required. This locking ring is made to be the first fail point if you drop your rifle. Everybody's heard the story of the guy who leaves it on top of the car and drives away. Warranty doesn't cover you dropping it. But something you can do if you're going to put a single point sling or something on there that you think is going to cause a little bit more stress on that is you can use a drop of white Elmer's glue. Not thread lock, not super glue. White Elmer's glue is the only modification to this that we are approving. You can take that drop of Elmer's glue right in front of where the notch is for the locking ring, inside on the threads. Put just a dab in there. It is not required in the assembly. Using white Elmer's glue, you will still be able to disassemble and remove the telescoping tube later. Get it on this surface or you won't be able to get the locking ring out later. White Elmer's glue still allows you to be able to unthread this telescoping tube at a later point. Going to thread that telescoping tube on. Again, it should go on nice and easy. Don't cross thread it. You're going to thread it all the way down in until it doesn't thread anymore. Then backing that off so that the notch on the locking ring lines up with the notch in the swivel. Pull the locking ring into place so that it locks the buffer tube into place, and tighten down the castle nut. Tightening the castle nut down hand tight. Now using either an AR multi-tool or a pair of slip jaw pliers. If you don't have a soft jaw pliers, you can cover the castle nut with a rag or something. You can also use a spanner wrench. The idea is don't scratch the nut. I'm going to use the AR multi-tool. you're just going to give it a little extra snug. You do not have to go overly tight with this. Tightening too much will damage the locking ring. It will crack it or damage the threads on the telescoping tube. That is the assembly of the telescoping tube into the swivel. This next step, we're going to assemble the swivel onto the receiver of the stock. To do this, you'll need 4 hex head nuts and 2 long screws. On the left side of the stock goes 1 hex head nut. On the right side, there are 2 hex head nuts. You'll insert the hex head nut so that it lays completely in the hole and is flush. If needed, you can use a pair of slip jaw pliers to gently, without marring the surface, seat the nut into place. 2 on the other side. You can also put a little bit of super glue around the edge of the nuts, not in the threads, just around the edge to help hold them in place if you're going to be disassembling the stack, but it is not required to use super glue at this point. Next, insert the receiver into the swivel, ensuring that it is seated all the way down. You can give it a little tap, and ensuring that the holes are lined up. Now we will take 1 long screw and 1 hex head nut, starting the nut onto the screw just very slightly, insert it in the other side of the receiver in the swivel. That's just to hold the nut in place. You can use 1 finger, hold it down in. Then you're going to insert the long screw in the other side. Get it started down in there using your 5/16 Allen wrench. Thread that screw down in until it reaches the other side of the nut, and it will stop. And then take that screw out. That allows it to still swivel and holds that nut in place while you set the screw. Now, using the screw you just took out, that is your set screw that you'll put in to hold the angle of the swivel that you wish. There are 3 different positions for the swivel. This is straight, there's halfway, and there's all the way down. You can set each point using the set screw. And again, just snug it up, doesn't have to be tight, and then go back in and just snug up the other side. That is the assembly of the swivel onto the receiver. For the next step, we're going to install the Picatinny adjustable forearm onto the receiver. For this, you'll need the 3 hex head nuts and 2 short screws. The hex head nuts, the 3 of them go down into here. You'll notice there's only 2 screws that go in. You'll line those up with whichever ones you want to whichever of the positions that you want. Using one of the short screws, we will thread on just a little bit the hex head nuts and insert them into the holes. That ensures that they're seated the entire way down. You can also take a drop of the super glue, again go around the outer edges just to kind of hold them in place a little bit if you're going to be taking the stock on or off a lot. you'll notice the end of the tri-Picatinny rail forearm is angled. That angle matches the angle on the receiver. You'll put that in towards the rear, sliding the Picatinny rail forearm then over and into position that you want. You can adjust this later at any point. Putting the nut on the long end of the Allen wrench and just a little bit of pressure, not too much or you'll push that nut up in and cross thread it. You just get that screw started and do the same thing with the other one. Then just go ahead and snug the two screws down. Again, you do not have to over tighten them. That concludes the assembly of the Picatinny rail forearm. Now we're going to assemble the buttstock onto the end of the telescoping tube. To do this, you're going to pull out on the locking lever at the pin. You want to pull the entire locking lever out away from the buttstock. That allows that pin to completely disappear versus when you just depress the lever and it only moves slightly. And that's going to slide over the end of the telescoping tube. Slide down in, pull out, and it goes on over. Nice and easy, clicks down into place. Then we're going to adjust this locking pin. You'll notice the depth of these holes in the telescoping tube. It is important that the locking pin fully seat down in those holes. You'll back off the nut until depressing it no longer allows you to adjust it. Then turn the nut in half turn increments until you are able to adjust the telescoping tube. That way it is fully seated into the telescoping tube. Failure to properly adjust this may result in damage to the telescoping tube if the stock is dropped. Again, something not covered under warranty. However, I want you to be able to get the most use out of your HT60. And it is important that if you drop that pin sits the whole way into the telescoping tube. Now we'll insert the roll pin into the end of the nut. We'll insert the roll pin into the end of the locking pin. You'll need a pair of slip jaw pliers so that the hole is lined up with the hole in the nut and the hole in the pin. Insert the pin, the roll pin, into the pin so that it starts. Using your slip jaw pliers, squeeze the roll pin into position. It is important that the roll pin be fully seated down into the nut. That is the assembly of the buttstock onto the telescoping tube. So this next step, going to insert your trigger assembly for the Marlin Model 60 into the receiver. To begin with, you're going to need your magazine port plug and your trigger assembly. The ear on the end of it faces the rear of the stock that goes down and in and slides in so that the front takedown screw can go in there. Using the thumb nut that you took off of your factory stock, you will insert that into the rear of the magazine port plug inside the stock. Holding that with your thumb, insert your trigger assembly, ensuring that the trigger assembly is properly seated all the way down in. Do not use the rear takedown screw to draw in the trigger assembly. It should go down in nice and flush and easy. Using the screw for the front trigger and holding the inside nut with your thumb still, using a flathead screwdriver, snug that down. That completes the installation of the trigger assembly into the HT60 stock for a Marlin Model 60. Now we're going to cover assembly of the Model 795 trigger and receiver into the HT60 stock. This is different than with the Model 60. To start with, you're going to put the actual rifle down into the stock. When you do this, you will make sure that your bolt release lever goes down through the hole, and you're going to want to kind of pick up on it a little bit. If you can see that it just kind of rocks up a little bit so that the holes line up. You're going to slide it down in, taking two hands, pressing firmly. You'll see that snaps down into place. It's a good tight fit, ensuring that the bolt release lever is clear and can move. Ensuring the rifle is properly seated, you'll need to squeeze. If it rocks, like so, it is not properly seated. Squeeze down and it will snap into place. Notice it no longer rocks. Now we'll place the trigger spacer over the front takedown hole on the HT60 stock. That goes between the stock and the trigger assembly. To put the trigger assembly in, you'll start with it tipped, feed it over the bolt release lever, jiggle it down in. Takes a little bit of jiggling, but it will go. And sits down in there flush. Make sure that it is flush both in the front and rear. Do not use the takedown screws to draw this into place. It will cause damage. Ensuring that your spacer is lined up. It is very important when tightening down your takedown screws not to over tighten them. Number one, if you over tighten them, the bolt will actually get hung up. It will not function properly. Number two, you can cause damage to the trigger assembly, especially if the spacer is not in there. Insert the rear takedown screw. Same thing, do not over tighten it, do not use it to draw the trigger assembly into place. Just snug. That concludes the assembly of the trigger assembly into the 795 stock. Now we're going to cover the assembly of the Model 60 into the HT60 stock. I have a new Model 60, so you're going to want to make sure that your bolt release lever lines up. When you slide it in, you're going to want to see if this pick up. If you leave this pushed down, your screw holes aren't going to line up. So you want to leave that pulled up, and you're going to want to snap it down in, and then with two hands it'll actually snap down into place. Okay, I'll do this again here. If I just snap it down in, if it rocks, it's not snapped down in. Okay, there should be no real rock to it. You just want to, using two hands, squeeze, and it will pop down into place. See, that, not down in. Now it's down in place. You'll also notice the HT60 stock does not ride the center line of the barrel. That is intentional to help balance out the stock and reduce some of the weight on the forearm, especially if you have some accessories out there. So it is intentional to kind of see what looks like a taper down there. Okay. You also, depending on what year and version of Model 60 you have, may see a small gap at the end. That's intentional because some of the older generations of the Model 60 have more space between the tube and the barrel, as well as if you leave this in a hot car, gets up to 150 degrees or so, when the polymer expands, you don't want that to crimp and cause damage to your magazine tube. So there is intentionally a small gap there. Next, we're going to put the takedown screws in, starting with the front takedown screw. You're going to put that in. Depending on what year you have, depends on what tools you use to put this in, but this is the takedown screw you took out of your factory gun. Using the 9/64 Allen wrench here for the new Model 60. Just going to tighten that down in. Doesn't have to be real tight, just snug it up. You don't want to use it to draw the rifle in. You'll damage the threads in your receiver. So you want to make sure your gun is all the way seated properly. And it should go in relatively easily. Same thing with the rear takedown screw. And you want to make sure that it's not drawing your trigger assembly down in, that your trigger assembly is still sitting down in there nice and tight, because you'll cause damage to the rear ear of your trigger assembly. Again, just nice and tight and snug. And that is the assembly of the Model 60 receiver into the HT60 stock. The last step in assembly of the HT60 stock is putting on the pistol grip. To do this, you'll need the grip in both the left and right mounts. The left side has the threaded insert, the right side does not. You use your final long screw and the pistol grip. You'll notice the mount has a notch in it. That goes into the notch on the receiver. There are three positions: forward for smaller hands, center, and rear for larger hands. Holding that in place, you'll insert the pistol grip, ensuring that the notches on the pistol grip are seated properly into the notches on the mount. That gives you two angles for the pistol grip to ensure that your wrist is comfortable. Placing the right side over the top and pinching both sides together. Again, make sure that that pistol grip is properly seated. Insert the long screw using the 5/16 Allen wrench. Tighten the pistol grip into place. You're going to tighten this down until there's no more wiggle in that pistol grip. Okay, this is probably the tightest screw you do when assembling the HT60 stock. So you're going to tighten that down until there's no more wiggle. There should be some flex, but no wiggle. You'll also notice a very, very tiny gap at the top, but not at the bottom of in the front of the pistol grip mount. It's telling you that it's seated properly. That is assembly of the pistol grip into the HT60 stock, and concludes the assembly of the HT60 onto the Marlin Model 60 and 795.